Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are tuning in to today's festival. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alan Cho. I'm the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop Executive Director and also this year's Festival Director. Let me introduce you to LiterASIAN. Launched in 2013, the LiterASIAN Festival is really the first of its kind within Canada, with a mandate to promote and celebrate the works of Asian Canadian writers and artists. Since my friend and mentor Jim Wong Chu first envisioned this festival in 2013, it's been really rewarding to see how far we've grown and how far we've come. This has been a particularly difficult year, not only because we're in the midst of a global pandemic, but also because of the rise of anti-Asian racism in Canada and throughout the world. We call this year's festival Quiet No More. The theme of this year's festival reflects the need to be exactly that, quiet no more, at a time when the easiest thing to do would be to remain silent as a bystander. If Quiet No More represents our resistance to silence on anti-Asian racism, we must also not be silent on anti-Black racism, homophobia, discrimination, and the many social injustices of this world. Being a bystander is no longer an option. And that's the central reason why we're holding this year's festival when the easiest thing to do would be to cancel and stay silent until things are back to normal again. But we know that we can't do that. This is the first time that we're holding our festival virtually and to a worldwide audience. A big shout out to everyone from across the world who are watching us from the comfort of their own homes and offices. Thank you for sharing your time with us from whatever time zone that you're in. Now I want to take a moment to thank our partners and sponsors. I want to thank the Vancouver Manuscript Intensive, Canada Council for the Arts, BC Artscape, Pacific Canada Heritage Centre, World Vancouver Book Festival, Rice Paper Magazine, Iron Dog Books, and the Chinatown Youth Collaborative. I also want to thank our wonderful team of volunteers who take time out of their personal lives to help make this festival possible. I want to thank Sophie Monk, our festival coordinator, who is really doing the heavy lifting of the festival's operations behind the scenes. Thank you for your dedication and passion, Sophie. Thank you to our bookseller this year, Iron Dog Books. If you're in Vancouver, please check out Iron Dog Books and take a look at the LiterASIAN book display exhibit there. Remember to say hi to Hillary and Duncan for us. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator today. Julia Lin is a longtime friend of mine, an accomplished author of both fiction and nonfiction books, Mia and Shadows of the Crimson Sun. We've edited books together, we've presented together, and we've even served on the same board of directors together. Julia is currently working on a novel in progress, so I'm ever grateful that she's able to take time out of her busy schedule to join us today. I know we're in good hands today with Julia as a moderator and MC. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Alan, and welcome everyone. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I recognize that we've all logged onto this seminar from different territories, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from my home in Vancouver on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I acknowledge all the nations who have cared for the land, recorded and unrecorded, and I'm grateful to have a home here. Before I introduce the panelists, some housekeeping items. If you're having trouble hearing the webinar, you can adjust your sound using the audio settings control on the bottom left of your screen. A reminder that you can see and hear the presenters, but we can't see or hear you. There will be some time to take your questions at the end, so please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any time. Finally, just to note that we will be recording today's session, but the audio portion will not be recorded. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's featured authors. We will hear from Anosh Irani, author of many books, the latest of which is translated from the gibberish. Fiona Tinwei Lam, author of Enter the Chrysanthemum and Odes and Laments. Carlo Javier, author of Janitors. Nathalie De Los Santos, author of Alice's Order, Kevin Kapenda, and Rachel Dessa, author of Alice in Glitterland. Each panelist will do a short reading, followed by a brief comment about why he or she chose the piece. The first panelist is Anosh Irani. Anosh Irani's latest novel, The Parcel, was a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award, the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize, and the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. The Parcel was chosen as one of the best books of the year by the Globe and Mail, Quill Enquirer, National Post, CBC Books, and The Walrus. His anthology, The Bombay Plays, The Matka King, and Bombay Black, was a finalist for the 2007 Governor General's Literary Award for Drama. Bombay Black won the Dora Maver Moore Award for Outstanding New Play. His play, The Men in White, was a finalist for the 2018 Governor General's Literary Award. His latest one-man show, Buffoon, won the 2020 Dora Maver Moore Award for Outstanding New Play. His latest book, translated from the gibberish, 7 Stories and One Half Truth, was published in India and Canada. His work has been translated into 11 languages. Today, he'll be reading from Translated from the Gibberish. Anosh.
Thank you, Julia, and my pleasure to join all of you today. I'd like to read from my latest collection of short stories translated from gibberish, 7 Stories and One Half Truth. I'll just read a very short excerpt and then I'll address Julia's question as to why I chose this passage for today's reading. I once had a yoga teacher who would use the word exile when he meant to say exhale. This was because of his accent. I was still in Bombay before leaving for Canada 20 years ago. I had a perpetually blocked nose thanks to a deviated septum, and my family doctor, Dr. Hansodia, sent me to this man. Exile, 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 the teacher would say, letting out the breath from his belly and mouth at great speed, encouraging us to do the same. I found the idea of breathing in a closed space with 15 other humans quite repugnant. All those germs moving around with the arrogance of frequent flyers, threatening to enter whomever they chose. But the word exile stayed with me, purely for its comic effect. Back then, I hardly knew what exile meant. Little did I know that the word would enter me more than any other germ, cause me to sneeze, ride with fever, laugh, dance, dream, cry, do who knows what as time went on, as a result of hurling myself from Bombay to Vancouver like a swashbuckling pirate. Now my swagger has gone. I cannot remember my yoga teacher's face, at least not entirely. I remember his nostrils and his mouth, but not the eyes. He almost never opened his eyes. I have a feeling he was from Kerala and was stuck in Bombay. He was expressing through his nostrils how the self and its true home was so far apart that only breathing could calm him down, smooth out his anxiety. I didn't know at the time that he was offering me a tool, a coping mechanism that I could use in Canada. Dr. Hansotia hadn't sent me to him because of my deviated septum. He'd sent me to this man because he somehow knew that my leaving India was going to cost me much more than international student fees. Why are you going? He asked me. I still remember the day and date, August 11, 1998. It was a Tuesday. I was set to leave for Canada a week later. I'm going there to study, I said. Study what? Creative writing? Oh, you want to be the next Tennessee Williams? No, I said. Son, are you sure you want to become a writer? A writer? Who said anything about becoming a writer? What the hell was this guy talking about? But of course, secretly, that's what I had decided. This was my dirty little tryst with destiny. Perhaps back then, I didn't understand the seriousness of my undertaking. I was about to lock horns with something that was larger than me, more powerful, and completely dangerous. I was on my way to becoming a flammable object. That's what writers are. And I knew I had it in me, this innate ability to combust. Writing isn't about prose. It's not about stories, plots, characters, themes, images, ideas, and certainly not about redemption. Do you have the ability to combust, to implode time and again, day in and day out with the stamina of an athlete, until you have written that novel of yours? Once the book is out, even if it gets great reviews, this still doesn't prevent your nerves from being on fire. because the next story has already come along. It's already spewing and vomiting inside your gut. It knows that your ability to combust is far greater than your capacity to heal. Thank you.
So, Anosh, why did you choose this piece to read for us?
So the thing is, as you just heard, I moved to Canada almost more than 20 years ago now, and I've always had this sense of being in between ever since I moved. Um, for almost 20 years now, I lost that sense of home. I don't know what home means anymore. So I constantly write out of displacement. And that is a very powerful place to write from, but it's not the healthiest place to live in, if you know what I mean. It really fuels my writing. It's given me great perspective because writing is at the end of the day about perspective. So being away from India sort of helped me see India and Bombay objectively. And then when I would come back, I would quickly fit into the flow of things. So I would be both someone who objectively views the place, an observer, and a very active participant. And it took me a very long time to write about Canada. And strangely enough, I had to come to India to write about Canada in this very room. There's this huge window which you can't see, and it's just a vast open space. And at night, the only thing you can see are some cooking fires. It's rare in Bombay to have that kind of view. But this darkness, for me, it represented the blank page, but it allowed me to see Canada through a window in Bombay.
Very appropriate for the theme. Okay, so we're going to move on because we have many readers to hear from. The next reader is Fiona Tinwei Lam. Fiona is an author, poet, and editor. She was born in Scotland and emigrated to Canada at a young age with her family. She's the author of Intimate Distances, Enter the Chrysanthemum, and a poetry collection, Odes and Laments. She also authored the illustrated children's book, The Rainbow Rocket. She is a co-editor of and contributor to the creative nonfiction anthology, Double Lives, Writing and Motherhood, and also the editor of the Bright Well, a collection of contemporary Canadian poetry about facing cancer. Her work has been published in over 30 anthologies. She teaches continuing studies at Simon Fraser University. Fiona.
Thanks so much, Julia. It's a real pleasure to be here amongst all you writers, and it's wonderful to see Anosh in Bombay. He was a classmate of mine, very talented, outstanding classmate years ago in a class at UBC MFA program with Maureen Medved as the teacher. Anyways, I am going to read for my 3 minutes and 12 seconds some poems, and I'm going to share the screen so that you can follow along with the poems. So just give me a second, and I will bring up the poems right now so that you can see them too. Can everyone see them okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Good. So here we go with 4 poems, 4 short poems. Coming to Canada. She has missed the collapse of a world, the cue for chaos. Shadows of sudden boats, inexplicable trains, voices, smells recostumed, the pull of adult hands. Abruptly, home is presented, a ruse of comfort. Alien faces hover, professing to be family. Prodded to perform, scriptless. The hyphenated. The left side of the hyphen lives on the side of town you visit with tourists. Smells like parcels from Hong Kong, crammed with clothes you never wear. It gets you punched in the back by the white boys at school, sworn at by drivers, asked by the neighbors if you've eaten their cat. The right side undoes your top shirt buttons, buys tight jeans, sings the anthem in French, almost fails physics, doesn't practice piano. It bakes brownies and meatloaf and glories in potatoes. In between them, the hyphen fissures your gut so that anything unlabeled tumbles through. It makes your face an imposter's, the gold-toothed smile of the Chinese grandmother seeking help at the store, shutting off as if you'd struck her. Your words empty as spilled teacups. Dance. At the grade 8 dance, they find you hiding behind folded lunch tables, seize your hands and feet, drag you across the floor like a mop. On the dance floor, a girl feigns stomping on your face. You run to the bathroom, wipe the grime off your dress, remove your glasses, world become blur, gentling to haze. If you can't see them, they can't see you. Those are all white girls, by the way, who dragged me on the dance floor. Rice. Curve upon curve, terraces ripple a valley with sheens of green, silver, gray, rhythmic seams undulating as if land were wave. Rice for us came from Chinatown. Rice came from stores. Rice came in a burlap sack, hauled and tossed into the car trunk like a sandbag, lugged upstairs to the kitchen, sheared open to release the cascade of white grains into a bin under the counter. Then scooped, triple rinsed, steamed in our ancient rice cooker with its rattling lid. The clicked switch signaled dinner. Steaming domes pillowed our bowls, mingled with stir-fry and stew, replenished again and again until the cooker was scraped to the bottom. My father's urgent quests through England, America, brushing past potatoes, bread, pasta, to hunt down Spartan cafes tucked in rundown blocks. He'd relish each mouthful as if haunted by ancestral hungers. Weeks without my cravings start, and now my son's, as if nothing else can quell the yearning of his cells, each lustrous mound a homecoming.
And why did you choose those pieces? I mean, they're obviously very personal for you.
Well, the first two were from my first book, and the last two were from my last book. But you can see there's some similar themes about being in between, especially the hyphen. I don't speak any other language except for English because I was born in the UK, and I came to Canada when I was 4 with a very thick Scottish accent, which I've lost. And I have a few words, food words here and there, and greeting and thank you words in other languages, but I can't communicate in Cantonese or Mandarin or Toisan or any other language. So it makes me very much in between. And yet, certainly during this pandemic, I'm seen as the virus. I am the virus, right? People are afraid. They're pulling up their masks. They're telling me I should put on a mask if I don't have a mask on. They're stepping away. So definitely feeling very much in between. So I thought I'd choose some poems about touching upon racism and also about what Anosh touched upon, the sense of displacement and being lost and confused and then feeling like I'm at home, but also not being perceived as being in my homeland. So yeah, complicated, intricate interweaving of in-betweenness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. 2 readings and 2 very personal experiences. I'm sure we'll get back to these themes or these ideas and readings that you guys have done so far when we get to the Q&A. Okay, let's hear from the next panelist, Carlo Javier. Carlo is a writer based in Coquitlam, BC. His work has appeared in the Capilano Courier, Vancouver Magazine, Western Living Magazine, and Philippine Canadian News. His first short story, Janitors, was published in 2019 as part of Immersion, an Asian anthology of love, fantasy, and speculative fiction. He's a graduate of Capilano University's School of Communications, as well as Lighthouse Labs Web Development Bootcamp. Carlo is a technical writer by trade. Carlo?
Hi, everyone. I am not going to screen share. I recently got a perm, so I would like people to see that instead. I'll be reading from a short story, an excerpt from a short story called Ate. And Ate is the Filipino word for big sister. Okay. April is nascent and the air is thick with morning dew. Ears agonizing like you've just removed headphones that were strapped around your head for too long. Legs aching as movement reintroduces blood back into your veins after a plane ride that felt like 1,000 pages. But what a book it was. First plane ride, first time out of Manila. An hour in Hong Kong and now you're on Canadian soil. Mountains visible against a cloudless blue sky. Summits topped with snow, white like your favorite makapuno. See mist manifest with your every breath. Smell the fresh cut grass. These are things you have never felt before. Mom says she's only seen snowfall in April once in her 4 years here. It will take some time. Winter is still half a year away, but you're hopeful. Get some sleep, Ate, she says to you as you make your way inside her one-bedroom apartment. Mom started to call you Ate when you became a big sister. Initially, it was just to teach your sister about kinship and respect, but it's grown into a nickname, a term of endearment. 2 weeks earlier, you crossed the stage at the University of Santo Tomas to accept your English degree. You wiped your hands against the loose sleeves of your gown before shaking the rector's hand and accepting the degree commemorating your years of hard work. Dalisay batong bakal. A little too Tagalog, a little too provinciana. But seeing your name alongside the words cum laude stirs up a sense of pride you didn't know existed within you. An official seal from the Department of Education on your degree, a medal around your neck. Your dreams of teaching can't come soon enough. There is a makeshift partition in the living room of Mom's apartment. This is where you and your siblings will sleep. Mom now works at a food court and Dad got a job cleaning at a high school nearby. You consider going to school and upgrading your education, but your parents have their eyes on a 3-bedroom apartment. So you apply at a food service provider and you take a job at a university cafeteria in Vancouver. You write Dolly down on your name tag and you wipe tables and trays, hand out chicken fingers, punch in orders on the cash register. Crowds furrow and laughter is held when students hear you speak. Club sandwich, medium price, and large Coke, no ice. Colleagues snicker when you say every syllable in words like basically or particularly. So at night, you use your phone as a light and read to yourself out loud, or whisper until you fall asleep, until you eradicate your accent. You grow accustomed to the snow and to the rain, to packing yourself inside the morning train like a sardine, a sea of elbows and underarms above you. You wake to pain in your shoulders, wrists, and the soles of your feet. You help with the mortgage, the groceries, and new basketball shoes for your brother. You pick him up from practice, drive him to games, take him to dinner after. You help your sister with her essays, buy her graduation dress, talk to her about boys. Send your parents on a cruise one Christmas. On Sundays, you sleep in, stretch your back, keep your feet off the ground, skip the morning mass. Sometimes you'll wake earlier and join your family at church, where your brother serves as an altar boy. Take a second to remember the prayers, the hymns, try to avoid the priest. Dolly, I haven't seen you in a while, he'll say on the odd Sunday you attend. Sorry, Father, you'll say back. Been working a lot. He'll say that work is not everything and the happiness cannot be bought. You notice the condescending look in his eyes, the patronizing tone, but you've trained yourself to think before you speak. See you next week, Father. One day your dad calls and you'll meet with him at a dealership. Your brother is graduating high school, honor student, starting point guard on the basketball team, scholarship offers in and outside the province. Ate, he'll say to you, just a bit of the down payment and part of the insurance. He's worked so hard, he deserves something nice. So you sign the papers and your brother comes home to a new car.
Thank you, Kim. So why did you, sorry, Carl, what made you choose this particular piece to read to us?
I was thinking about the theme, and I moved to Canada when I was 12, and obviously there's some in-between experience there, but I was more interested in Filipino immigrants, and I know many Filipino immigrants who move here maybe in their late teens or maybe in their early 20s, and I wanted to look at my privileges having been able to move here at a younger age, and thus I was able to go to middle school and high school. And it's a different transition for me, and the people I know who move here in their I guess their late teens or early 20s, kind of had to grow up much faster than I have grown up, because certain responsibilities were placed on them because when they moved here, they were adults right away. So I was interested in looking at that experience of being in between, and also my own privilege as somebody having been able to go to school here at an earlier age.
Thank you. So 3 readers, 3 personal experiences. Next, we'll see what Nathalie De Los Santos. We wonder if she's going to continue the same trend. Nathalie is a digital designer, videographer, and photographer in Vancouver, BC. She has written articles for the Vancouver Observer, Rice Paper, and Gastrofork. She is one half of Philippine Pages, a bookstagram of Filipino American and Canadian books and authors. She's released 2 science fiction fantasy books, Alice's Order and Hasa Mañana. Hasa Mañana was collected into the Vancouver Public Library through the Indie Authors Program. Nathalie is currently working on a Filipino fantasy novel called Diyosa Mata, which she hopes to one day share with the world. And you can correct all my spelling for me, or pronunciation of everything that you wrote.
Actually, you know what? Even though I'm Filipino, my Canadian pronunciations I get called out on, so that's fine. So I will be reading an excerpt from a short story that I'm working on called Beyond the Sea, and I would like to dedicate this one to my dad. Okay, here we go. November 1954. On the tarmac, Biddle admired the silver wings of the plane, the fresh blue and red lines that were painted on the 2 propellers. Biddle's mother handed their luggage to a crewman by the plane. An attendant announced, "Philippine Airlines to New York is boarding now." Excitement hit him again. He was only 8 and he got to travel overseas. His mother told him there'd be 3 stops and this would take 11 days over the Pacific Ocean, and then there was one last flight to New York. When Biddle entered the cabin, he was immediately greeted by a woman with golden hair wearing a red scarf. Biddle blushed, holding onto his ticket tightly. She looked like the white Madonna statue in his church, the same blue eyes and fair hair. His mother chuckled and shuffled him down the aisle. As his mother buckled him in his seat, Biddle dug into the pocket in front of him. He pulled out a paper bag. "What's this for?" Biddle asked. His mother grinned. "It's to throw up in." He understood as soon as the plane started. The turbines were loud and rocked the plane. He held on to his mother. "When we lift off, go, ah!" She opened her mouth. "It'll help when your ears pop." He tried his best to push down the acidic feeling rising in his throat. They served them ham on some nice blue china with silverware, which he refused. The days across the ocean were the same, a blur of nausea in overnight airport hotels in Hong Kong and South Korea, a flight attendant waking him to buckle his seatbelt. When he woke once, his mother handed him a chocolate bar in a bright red wrapper covered in English words. Soon, he'd be in America. Too precious to eat, he put the chocolate into his pocket, not knowing what his own warmth would do to it. When they landed in Seattle, Biddle didn't take in the significance of finally being in another country. He blurted and danced, "I need to pee." "Down the hall, Vidal," his father guided him. There were 2 doors for the men. Biddle saw a dark-skinned man enter the door on the left. Another black man walked past his father and said hello. His father did not answer. His father quickly checked if his satchel was zipped properly, then quickly directed them to the bathroom on the right. Inside were men with porcelain skin and fair hair. Biddle went to go relieve himself as his father stood by the door. "Chinks," a man muttered behind them. Biddle turned his head, curious. The man spat at his father. His father was frozen, unable to react. As soon as Biddle tugged his father's shirt, his father stepped back into their dimension. "Come on," his father pulled him away. Outside, Biddle asked his father, "What does chink mean?" His mother turned to them wide-eyed. His father explained to his mother bashfully, I'm too scared to go into the colored washrooms. Some Americano made fun of us in the whites." Though Biddle met his mother's eyes, she was looking somewhere distant. "Don't get upset," his father frowned at his mother. "But we need to tell him. Biddle, in this country, people have a lot of differences. It matters if your skin is black or white." Biddle looked at his own skin, and then at his father's curiously. His father's skin was the color of a pili nut. She caught his glances. "Our skin isn't white, Biddle. We have to be careful." Okay, Fiddle complied.
Thank you. And your reason for choosing this particular piece?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the cultural in-betweenness of our own inner contradictions, being Asian regarding racism. So in my work, Fiddle experiences both casual racism and a more threatening one. He doesn't really question his father's casual racism, but he knows to fear the exchange that happened in the washroom. And he also doesn't know if he's black or white when his mother explains segregation. So he's in the in-between that I thought would be relevant to this panel.
Yes, really appropriate. Okay. Next up is Kevin Kapenda. Kevin is a multidisciplinary urbanist interested in planning for diverse and immigrant populations, housing policy, local economic development, and parks and recreation planning. He earned a Master of Science in Urban Planning, specializing in parks and recreation, planning in diverse communities, and social policy from the University of Toronto in 2019, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Communication from Kapenda University. He is currently a public consultation specialist for the Department of Words and Deeds. Kevin was formerly the news editor of the Capilano Courier. He is interested in institutions, race, human rights, and post-colonial topics. Kevin.
I have to unmute myself. Thank you.
Okay.
When I was growing up, I didn't believe in anti-Black racism. Sure, I had experienced racist incidents for as long as I can remember. However, my traumatic awakening was learning that in the global hierarchy of white supremacy, I was at the bottom of the social pyramid. That was when I truly knew I was Black. The way this hierarchy is experienced varies depending on the context. In Vancouver, Black people are rendered invisible, but when we are seen, our diversity doesn't hesitate to remind us of where we stand. Indeed, much of the racism I've experienced has been from individuals who also belong to racialized populations. This confused me growing up. It was 1:30 a.m. and I had just arrived at Surrey Central Station. I took the escalator down to street level and exited the fare gates. My condo building was a 12 to 15 minute walk from the station, but I was hungry after 3 hours of drinks and laughs. I walked into Uncle Fatih's Pizza, a storefront nestled underneath the SkyTrain platforms, for a few slices. As I stood in line, a 30-something-year-old South Asian man approached me. "What's up, bro? Fun night?" he asked. "Yeah, dinner and drinks in Vancouver with friends, same old," I replied in an uninterested tone. "Yo, bro, do you rap?" he said. "No, I don't," I replied. "Just asking, bro. You look like you could be an artist." I didn't reply, but he was adamant to keep talking, and I was still in line as Uncle Fatih is often busy during the early Sunday morning drunk pizza rush. "What if I give you raps, my nigga? I'm a producer," he asked. "Please don't call me that," I replied, raising my voice. "It's all good, boss. I'm brown. Me and my Somali friends call each other nigger all the time," he said. "You're not Black, and you shouldn't be using the word," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I see, man. I didn't mean to offend you, but we should definitely do music." "I think I'm all right, man. Have a good night," I said while moving towards the cashier to order my pizza. I took my slices to go and proceeded to walk to my apartment, thinking about the interaction I just had. The use of the N-word by non-white youth of color is endemic in Vancouver, particularly in the city where the Black population is smaller in comparison to other large Canadian cities, and many youth don't actually know any Black people. If they do know any, they're acquaintances from work, school, or sports, and their relationships with them are superficial. This interaction was also a great example of the fetishization end of the Black experience spectrum in white and Asian cities like Vancouver. When people aren't calling you the N-word out of hate, they're calling you the N-word in a fetishizing and stereotyping way. As I was approaching my building, there was a light-skinned young woman walking towards the door as well. It was dark and I couldn't tell her ethnicity from where I was. After seeing me, she began increasing her pace to beat me to the door, clutching her purse with her fob in hand. She was clearly anxious. These types of moments are always complex. I understand that women have to take precautions at night, but I also understand that as a Black person in Vancouver, where my community is basically invisible, people are often more afraid of the color of my skin than they are of my gender. I slowed down so she could enter the building and hear the door latch behind her. As I approached the building door, I caught her staring at me as she waited for the elevator, wondering to see if I was a resident or a visitor. Entering a building while Black, as it's known. That microaggression when light-skinned people surveil you because they don't know if you can afford to live in the same building as them. The woman was white. I was now in bed watching YouTube videos, trying to fall asleep. As I put my phone down and shut my eyes, I made the mistake of thinking about the last time someone called me the N-word in Vancouver. I remembered an interaction I had with a colleague at my university newspaper. It happened 2 years ago, but felt like it occurred last week, since I spent most of the time between then and now in Toronto pursuing a master's degree. The interaction happened at a holiday staff party. Normally, the editorial staff just went out to drink and eat in December before winter break, but this time we decided to go bowling and do something. It might have been to appease some of the self-proclaimed lightweights on the editorial staff. I remembered the interaction like it was yesterday. "Nigga, you suck," said April in response to my gutterball. "Don't call me that," I replied. "Me and my friends say it all the time. My Black friend in Coquitlam doesn't mind." "Well, I'm not her and I do." "Yes, you're smiling and you aren't even that offended," she argued. April is Chinese. My friend Eric, who is Filipino, was probably the only person taken aback. The other person of color there, Joyce, who is Filipina, laughed and has also used the word in the past around me. Sadly, most of the other staff didn't care. After all, silence is one of racism's greatest allies. It's what allows racism to prosper and go unchecked. That's it.
Thank you, Kevin. And you chose that obviously because it's quite meaningful for you.
Yes. If I could just preface why I chose it. When I was in Toronto pursuing my master's, one of the professors, was having an interaction with him and one of the students he was supervising. And he got his PhD from the University of Washington, so in Seattle. And he made a comment that I still remember, and it's been almost 2 years. He said, there are basically no Black people in Seattle. And what he meant by that was not that there weren't any, but that we weren't important, that we weren't a part of the kind of dominant kind of socio-political kind of order in the city. So he started talking about the kind of vibrant and diverse Asian communities that kind of populate Seattle and contribute to kind of the culture and the economy there, as well as the kind of white communities. I'm saying that Seattle is one of the whitest big cities in North America, which is true. But I just find that interesting, like growing up in Vancouver and kind of traveling throughout the West Coast. There's a very kind of active culture of erasing Black populations. You see that basically from San Francisco all the way up to Vancouver, both in systemic and very institutional ways, like the expropriation of Hogan's Alley in Vancouver, but also that's in very casual ways where people will say that there aren't any Black people in Vancouver or San Francisco or Seattle. So kind of that in-betweenness of being Black in, I guess, a region of North America that is either associated with Asian populations or white populations.
Mm-hmm. And you've lived in Toronto, obviously, when you were studying. Do you notice a big difference in the populations, the way their attitudes are towards Blacks?
Well, I think anti-Black racism is everywhere. I'm not trying to bash Vancouver or the West Coast, but it is different because of the visibility of Black people there, and also the existence of Black neighborhoods. So the most famous people in Toronto right now, person is Drake, and the Toronto Raptors just won the title, and there are like a lot of Black enclaves, both in the city of Toronto, like Jane and Finch and Little Jamaica, but also in the suburbs, Brampton and Ajax, Pickering, and places like that. So it's that racism and anti-Blackness is still there, but like the context is very different, obviously.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you're on this panel because this is LiterASIAN, and we think, Asians are the victims of racism, whereas from your perspective, you're getting even more racism from Asians or people of color sometimes than whites. So that's it's actually a topic really close to my heart because Chinese actually have quite a few biases that are not very savory. So glad to have you here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And last but not least, we will hear from Rachel Dessa. Rachel is a Burnaby-based writer and musician. Her writing explores adulthood through reflections on her childhood, as well as the biracial lens. With a background in journalism, her work can be seen in the Capilano Courier and on Vancouver International Film Festival's website. Rachel is a recent graduate from Capilano University's School of Communication Studies. She is in the process of producing her first solo full-length album and launching a creative agency. Wow, she's really busy. So let's hear from Rachel.
Oh, there we go. I just unmuted myself. Thank you, Julia. So I think I'll start off with my preface first, just because I think the story requires a little bit of context. So the excerpt I'm sharing today is part of a full short story titled Black Mountain, and it's autobiographical and also a mystery suspense story. And the part that I'm reading is more so focused on my biracial experience and the subtleties being biracial. And it aims to focus on my detachment and identity crisis growing up Indian and Italian and the contrasting experiences that I've had during my time spent with my parents alone, separately. So yeah, here we go. A fair warning, though, it does contain explicit language. Just have to put that out there. All right. Mom wastes no time in tying up the loose ends. She's used to cleaning up Dad's mess even after his passing. This Labor Day weekend is no different. It's been years since we saw the trailer, and we all have our predictions. The makeshift luggage of garbage bags thrash as we try talking over them with the windows rolled down. I think it's just as ugly as it was 2 decades ago, says Monica, and we know she's right. I can feel my outfit molding to my body in the heat as we wheeze past the U.S. border into Sumas, Washington. My eyes ache through a pair of sunglasses, squinting to take in the familiar structures on the way up to the camping ground. It was a piece of trash, the outdated 19-something park model, a breeding ground for family arguments despite the animated performance that would routinely take place every summer. I would unpack the $1 hot dog buns and chocolate milk while, under the instruction of Dad, Monica would turn on the gas and sweep the roof. The annual routine, much like the daily routine of watching World Vision ads during breakfast and scribbling down the stock market numbers before leaving for elementary school, was unavoidable. Sundays were a rigid routine of church and chapatis, and summertime presented no escape. Homely scratch nose in smudged lead and sticky fingers from sweet tea, Sundays were long. They were now a time for recovery. I never imagined my parents to have experienced substance abuse, and I often imagine their disappointment. The same sort of disappointment I noticed in my dad's muzzled look when I once told him I was frustrated that I had gotten his brown eyes over Mom's green ones. We make it through the gates to the ranch with the swipe of a security card and a quick glance at the crusty fire danger sign. Hi. We pass the lawns of grass, the putting green where Monica was hit on the back of the head with a golf ball, the outdated movie room where I once asked, how come we don't get tornadoes in Vancouver? What stops the tornadoes from coming to us? To which Dad replied, they don't have passports. Sailing over an endless mob of pine needles, we pull into the driveway, a small cleared patch amidst the forest. We're going to need a hell of a lot more crap buckets if we're going to empty this shit tank, says Monica. Her face dons a marble cheese complexion, flushed from lifting an ice cooler out of the van's trunk. We know we have plenty of space, but rush into the car nonetheless. Shopping in the States meant cheap thrift stores, pawn shops, and Bella's Fair. The only shopping center that we would frequent with a Hollister. Wrinkled and Andrew Jackson's in our palms, we'd clear-cut the beeline to the clearance section. Though we both learned how to be thrifty, Monica always had an eye for finding treasures, making her popular among her peers that would summer in Hawaii and Mexico with their SUV parents. Our zucchini charm bracelets were also enough to get us through elementary school without much bullying. Exhaustion filled Dad's eyes as he trailed behind us into the beachy storefront, the brothel-esque lighting consuming us, making our thick black hair foreign among the pale highlights and complexions surrounding us, making Dad nearly untraceable.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for your wonderful readings. I just wanted to remind the audience that if you have any questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to submit them, and we'll get through them as many as we can in the time that we have left. I'd like to kick things off by asking each of the panelists if you have personally experienced barriers to publishing as a person of color or know of other writers who have. So maybe we can just start in this, unless you guys want to jump in, you're welcome to, but I just thought we'd start in the same order as we did the readings. So maybe Anosh can start us off.
So, in my case, I have to say I've been very lucky that I found a wonderful literary agent when I came to Canada, and I've sort of been blessed to find fantastic editors to work with, and this is something that I would encourage writers to think about. Developing a relationship with an editor, having a good relationship with an editor is really a blessing. And whether it's my novels or whether I've worked with dramaturgs in theatre, that connection is so important for your work to evolve, for your work to have depth. And even though I have to say that apart from maybe one editor who had some connection to India, my editor is white. And at the same time, she's been an absolute blessing in my life because as a human being, she's understood the work that I put out there. So personally in my life in Canada, I have experienced racism. Luckily for me in publishing, it's been a good experience.
Well, let me follow up on that because many of our audience are unpublished and or emerging writers, and they're going, "What? You got an agent right away, and you got an editor right away, and how did you get there? Did you have any barriers?"
Maybe my situation again is unusual, but I will say one thing is focus on your craft. The problem is that we focus on the wrong thing. We focus on how will I get an agent, how will I get published, how will I get an editor, how do I market myself. Those are the things that we should not be focusing on. I didn't think of any of those things in my early years. All I wanted to do when I moved to Canada was I wanted to learn how to write. And in my mind, I'm still learning how to write. It doesn't matter whether I've written 5 novels or 5 plays. I'm constantly hungry to learn. And this is the important thing for me, is your craft is really, really important. So once your work is strong, it will automatically find an audience. It will automatically find an agent, an editor. You'll be surprised at how responsive people can be. But if your focus is, I have to get out there, I have to make connections, yeah, do all of that. But don't forget that you have to be really good at the art and craft of writing. So I would say that's the thing that you should be focusing on and continue to work on it until, I guess for me, it's a lifelong process.
Very wise. Fiona, I see you nodding, so I'm sure you have things to say.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, I remember meeting Anosh when we were both students many years ago in this summer course at UBC, and we were both starting out. And Anosh wrote these amazing, unique stories. They were very quirky and they really stood out. They were very distinctive and they were clearly his voice. And I think the teacher and everyone in the class could recognize that right away. So, I think being in a writing program really helps build community and connections. You get to know the teachers and other writers. They recognize your work. They encourage you to send out your work. I did a UBC Masters of Fine Arts and Creative Writing after abandoning a law career, so a little later in life. And I still, like Anosh, I feel like I'm always beginning. And I tell you, I know people with Governor General's Awards that are getting rejections. Rejection is part of the journey of a writer. It's not like, oh, here's my one story and now I'm going to be famous. Maybe that will happen to you, but mostly it's lots of editing, lots of submitting, lots of rejection, lots of revision. And I think right now with Canada Council funding the arts and various literary magazines like Room Magazine, one of the ways I came through was with this anthology that the Asian and Canadian Writers Workshop had Jim Wong Chu helped initiate, and that helped too. So these anthologies, there's going to be a workshop on anthologies coming up next weekend with LiterASIAN, which I recommend. So getting together in an anthology, you can find somebody who has published and say, hey, can you edit an anthology of whatever kind of writing, biracial writing, whatever kind of writing on whatever theme? Get your foot in the door with some literary magazines, maybe CBC Prize, something like that, and slowly you'll build up your reputation. But as Anosh notes, you need to start with good writing, and learning how to be a good writer means reading a lot of writing, trying different things, finding a genre you like, finding your own voice. You may have to rediscover your voice each time. But I think for every writer, you're always a beginner. I'll always feel like a beginner. I feel like I'm a beginner now because my son's now going off to university, so I was like, now I get to actually be a real full-time writer instead of little bits and scraps of time here and there. So I think everyone has a bunch of creative seeds in them, and whether or not they grow, they have to find the right soil and they have to persist.
Yes, so true. So, Carlo, Nathalie, Kevin, Rachel, do you have any stories or experiences that you want to share with us about being a person of color in the publishing industry?
I guess I can jump in. Mine's pretty short, just an observation. So right now I am looking to, pitch my book out and or my my Filipino fantasy novel that I've been working on out, and just see the feelers. So I've done a couple of pitches, and I'm not gonna lie, most of the agents and publisher houses that I've approached, at least in the fantasy genre, are predominantly white. I don't think that really, it's not to say there's something wrong with these agents, because I think that they have a wonderful eye for taste and things like that. But I find it really peculiar that I've literally just pitched to one Filipino agent who is no longer active, because the pool of diversity is still, I guess they're still working on it, because there's been plenty of BIPOC exclusive calls, and I do believe publishing houses are trying their best to, especially with Black Lives Matter, they are looking for this content. So it's actually a good time to look, but it's just kind of daunting being an emergent writer myself, being like, okay, hopefully this person understands what I'm writing, and just presenting myself for the first time.
Thank you. And do any of the rest of you have any comments about anything?
I think I got pretty lucky at first. I come from a journalistic background, and I think I lucked out having met by chance Vincent Ternida and Alan Cho and William Tam. So that kind of was a gateway for me to write about racism and immigration. But I think in terms of barriers for me, it's a lot of mental barrier because I feel that whenever I see contests or submission calls, I always feel like I have to write about immigration and othering and racism issues. And what I've found over the past, I guess I only started a year and a half ago, is that I also would like to write stories that are not often, tokenized as a story written by an Asian person. I also would like to write a sci-fi story or a love story. And whenever I see submissions, I always have this mental barrier that if they see my name, publishers will be expecting a story about racism or othering or immigration. So I think that's my personal barrier. And I don't know whether that speaks more about myself or about the industry, but I do feel that way whenever I pitch out an idea or even a manuscript.
Yes, I think a lot of people of color, when they write, they feel like they need to represent their community in some way. But I think when we get to the point where you're just a writer and nobody cares what your ethnicity is when you write your stuff, then we've actually reached a stage where diversity is truly in place, right? I'm going to just turn a little bit to the parts that are difficult about writing. I know, Anosh, when I was reading Translated from the Gibberish, I got the impression that being a writer has been really difficult for you, not just because you're a person of color, but just being an artist in general. Would you care to speak about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing is, what I experienced in Canada when I moved. So in Bombay, I had a tremendously full life. I was part of a soccer team. I used to have a motorcycle. I used to be riding the motorcycle in the city at odd hours of the night. I had tons of friends. And then suddenly I decided to move to Canada because I wanted to learn how to write. And that isolation sort of created this claustrophobia, this pressure on me, which ended up being a huge gift. Because the only thing I had left was the blank page. The only thing I did was sort of enter used bookstores and just discover novels and just read everything that I could get my hands on. But the tough part is, even though I've been fairly successful at what I do, I feel that as a human being, it takes a lot out of me. For example, my previous book, The Parcel, was set in Bombay's red light district called Kamadipura, and it's one of the most notorious red light districts in Asia. And I was born right opposite it. And I spent years and years, right from the time I was a kid to when I moved to Canada. Each time I've come back to India, I just walked through the district as an observer because that was the setting for my book. And there were so many things that I saw that I wish I hadn't seen. You know, once you see something, once you know something, you can't unsee it. And being in contact with members of the transgender community, with sex workers, with NGO workers, you heard some horrible things and you realized a human being's capacity to inflict cruelty on another human being. And what was surprising, that it wasn't just the men who were responsible for trafficking, the women were equally responsible. And these were things that I was, constantly shocked to discover. And it takes a lot out of you as a human being. The writing part for me is actually not the difficult part. When I ended up writing The Parcel, it was just the main character sort of just unleashed herself. But the challenge is in trying to find the balance, going home and being able to sleep when you've seen so much. And it's really, if I'm just, not complaining, but if I'm just moved by seeing, imagine the people who are actually experiencing it. So that knowledge is difficult to shake off, and it definitely takes a toll. I always say that, as a human being, you're trying to forget, but as a writer, you're trying to remember. And that is the challenge. I don't have any romantic notion about writing. I don't think it's I think that's all nonsense, for me at least. It's not a romantic pursuit. It's tough. You are almost in training. You're like an athlete, and you need a lot of stamina. You really need stamina, because you're trying to create a body of work, and in the creation of that body of work, sometimes you get drained out. There are moments of euphoria which are tremendous, but you also constantly get knocked off your feet. You go off kilter, off balance. So it's very fulfilling, but it's tough.
Mm-hmm. For a lot of writers in Canada in particular, because we have a small population, it's hard for writers to actually make a living as a writer, a full-time writer. Are you in that position?
Well, there were times when I was only writing full-time, but now I also teach at Simon Fraser University in the World Languages and Literatures department. So I teach for 2 semesters, and then I take time off and write. But I'm constantly writing, in the sense that not typing things, but I have these pads that I keep making tons and tons of notes. And writing is a lot about being patient and just waiting. It's when I'm working on a book, I won't write a word for a year, 2 years, 3 years even. I'll just avoid going to the computer. I'll just make notes and notes and notes. So sometimes you run out of money, because writing is thinking. No one pays you to think. So it is a challenge, but you have to find your way through it.
Yes, I think the message is coming clear, loud and clear, that it's a long haul game, right? I think Fiona has also something to say on this topic. Do you, Fiona?
Yes, I wanted to. Yes, it definitely does take stamina. It can help to go through a course or a program and have a community, all those things. As far as what I'm going to talk about what Carlo talked about. I know, for example, Jen Suk-Fong Lee had difficulty because one of her agents and her publisher wanted her to write the same kind of stuff, more Amy Tan-oriented, family-oriented stories, and she had an edgier, sort of a murder mystery type book that didn't follow the kinds of tropes that were expected that would be marketable to sell. And she did find another publisher, and it did well. Maybe didn't sell the same as her previous books, but facing that, she still found another publisher. And I've only published with small presses. I'm a poet. Poets don't make a living at poetry unless they combine it with something else. And small presses, you don't need an agent. Very few poets have agents unless they're doing other things as well, like novels and the like. So, I'm working in sort of this low-level rung. Poets have small audiences. They're not appreciated that much. So I'm sort of used to being kind of, the chopped liver of the literary world. But I'm hoping to grow and so forth. But facing barriers as far as expectations, I think we have to try to get those imposed expectations out of our heads and just write what we want to write, which will change from time to time and whatever we're going through, wherever we're remembering, and find what we want to say and not worry about the market.
Yes. It's hard, right? Because you want to have an audience, but you also want to be true to your own writing.
Yeah.
It's a fine balance. Fiona, I want to stay with you because I know you've been really active about discrimination during the pandemic. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I think Anosh is right that, the truest writing is really, really hard. I decided to write about racism in the pandemic for the local news magazine, the Tyee, and I've been also writing some nonfiction about racism, which is not what I normally write about. I've written stuff about cancer, I've written stuff about motherhood, I've written about all these other things. So racism has been a very, very small part of my writing, and to scrape away at some of those bad memories and experiences of witnessing and experiencing it, it's been hard to even describe the incidents that have been in the news of people, a lot of seniors and young women, whether they're actually Asian or perceived as Asian, they might be Indigenous, getting physically assaulted and so forth and spat at. It's horrible. I mean, we want to turn away from that, but that's the reality right now. There's a lot of blaming going on, but I want to write about it because I think there's a desire not to sort of not to turn away and to say, oh, it's just the crazy people, oh, it's just this or that. But I think there is a real bias, a historic bias that's coming out right now in these times. So it's been excruciating to try to write about, but I feel like I need to.
So before I go to questions from the audience, I just want to give the other panelists a chance to say anything else before we break off. Anybody want to add to anything that they've said or react to anything that any of the other panelists have said? Okay. All right, then. I'm going to go to the questions from the audience, and I think Joanne is going to be asking them for us. So I wonder if Joanne could turn on her camera and ask the questions.
Sure. First one, what will be the signal to you that you are no longer in between, that you have crossed to the other side, that you truly belong?
So anybody from the panel is welcome to jump in if you have any thoughts on this.
I don't know if the goal is to cross to the other side. Maybe there's kind of like, maybe it's good to be in the in-between. I'm not necessarily sure whether crossing to the other side is the goal. I feel like it sounds a little like assimilating. I could be wrong. So I think that for me, the identity is always going to be in between, and I think there's strength in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I'm biracial, and so there's really no crossing over to the other side. I guess for me, I'm always kind of in this in between two different cultures that are so involved in my life. And as Carlos said, it's not really the goal to cross over, at least for us. Growing up, like, I never talked about race within my family. We never talked about being biracial. My mom and dad never spoke to me about being in an interracial relationship and what that was like and the barriers that they faced. And so I grew up very comfortable in my own skin, and it's just becoming apparent to me now. And as a teenager going through my adolescent years, realizing that race plays a factor in everyday life, and it's affected me and my family. And just finding strength in that now and trying to be proud of both my heritages. And I think that's really important, is just to find strength in the in-between, not necessarily put that pressure on yourself to either assimilate or disconnect with your surroundings, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have any thoughts on this topic? Okay. All right. Joanne, do you have another question for us?
Sure. This is a question for everyone that was submitted. How are you finding writing during this pandemic, which Fiona kind of touched on, but in a different aspect?
I know Fiona has spoken already, but go ahead.
I think with the pandemic, with everyone it's kind of created this existential dread. And for me, there's a lot of, because we can't see our friends and other people in our lives, there's been a lot of group chats, and I found that there's a lot of story ideas coming out in these late night group chats because we just have anything else to do. So I've actually, at least over the past 2 months, I've written much better than I did from the beginning, compared to the start of the quarantine, only because I've started to pull ideas from these conversations where we don't know what's going to happen and we don't know a lot of things. So yeah, I've been making the most out of just being isolated and having time to be introspective and having time to discuss certain things with my friends and just pulling those ideas and trying to generate stories out of those. So
I just want to jump in. I do not know the Chinese word for this, but my friend brought up this term that just means thoughts born out of boredom, and that's how I describe most of my work. And I would try to find it, but I probably couldn't pronounce it anyways.
I don't think I can help you. Boredom is wu liao, but I don't know about the exact phrase that you're looking at. Anyway, anybody else want to speak to this?
I do feel very creatively charged these days, which is something that I was lacking when I was finishing up my degree and still working pretty full time. So it's been nice, but also hard being at home 24/7. You know, people have different political views in this household, and well, just different views in general. So it's difficult, and definitely a time of educating each other and understanding, trying to create mutual understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add that I find it slightly harder because I did have like a 9-to-5 job, and then now I'm mainly working from home, which was like my writing space or like my artistic space. So like getting myself in a frame of mind to write in the same place I'm often doing like paid work has been kind of hard. Sometimes I find myself trying to go to cafes or trying to go to other places to write, but then you shouldn't be going out and doing like non-essential dining or lounging, I suppose. So it's kind of hard to put myself in the frame of mind to write when I'm like always at this desk doing like, a variety of things.
All right. Should we move on to the next question then, Joanne?
Sure. Another question popped up. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep track. What is your vision for the future after this global pandemic? What changes do you hope to see? Do you think anything will change?
You know, I can maybe just talk about that. It's something that the important question to ask is, you know, what does change look like? And for me personally, it's internal. Of course, the external changes are very important. The protests are important. The activism is important. All of that is absolutely vital. But as artists, as an artist, as a writer, as a human being, for me, it's most important to reflect. You know, every time there is a disturbance, we get unsettled. But the important thing is to go inward and reflect, and somehow we have to come out kinder and more compassionate. If it's only natural that the fury rises, that we get angry, and but at the end of the day, we should not become part of that fury. We should not become part of that poison and anger. If we can somehow try and be more compassionate, more kind, that is something that is a very important change at the individual consciousness level. And when it comes to the work, the other thing I find, because I also teach, and sometimes I find this with writers when they're starting out, is there's a lot of passion, a lot of energy, and a lot of anger in the work, but it stays as anger. It does not transform into something of a higher nature. And this is why one of the first things I spoke about was focus on your craft. Because writing is about taking all those things and transforming them into something of a higher nature and creating a dent in somebody's consciousness. You want them to feel that shock when they read your work. You want them to get punched in the stomach so that they stop. Their sort of beliefs are shattered just for a moment so that something else can enter, or they are encouraged or forced to go on a search. So for me, that is, we should remember the function of art, but also the function of the artist as a human being is to maybe become more empathetic and more kind and more inclusive. So we have to kind of lead the way for that.
Mm. Anyone else have thoughts to follow up on that? I have a follow-up question, actually. What sort of institutional changes would you like to see in order to make publishing itself more inclusive? Does anybody have any ideas along that line?
I have something. Sorry, there's a little bit of noise in my house, and so I was muting my mic. But yes, I do have a couple thoughts on that. I think there could be a larger focus on diversity reporting in J School. For instance, the first journalism conference that I ever went to, which was Nash 80 in Toronto, we had a bunch of schools attend. It's a university nationwide conference, and so there are all these J schools there, all these young journalists, and one of the keynotes, which was Desmond Cole, he had a beautiful, powerful keynote speech, and he got a standing O from everyone. And at the end, as he was going into his Q&A and answering people's questions, and the room started to fill with noise, and people started to eat their food, and there was a lot of chatter over top of him, and it was very ironic in a room full of journalists to see this Black activist and journalist standing before them, having just given an amazing emotional speech on racism in reporting in the media, and then for him to be ignored like 2 minutes later is really ironic. And it just goes to show that there needs to be a lot more diversity reporting and a lot more like sensitivity training in J schools and just in the media rooms, regardless of whether or not these are new journalists entering the field or journalists that have been in the field for years. I think there needs to be a lot more diversity training.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add to, sorry, I'm just gathering my thoughts. So while I'm looking on the market currently for my fantasy novel, I chose to self-publish my first book. And I don't have the same stigma towards self-publishing, but I think eliminating some of that stigma would actually help BIPOC communities, mostly because if you think about it, our generation is mostly self-published. Like YouTube has changed the landscape of video content. There's no more gatekeepers keeping marginalized folks from producing content that otherwise would be rejected by broadcasters. Whether or not you like Instagram influencer culture, it's still opened the door for contents I just don't think would exist in the past, like POC people cosplaying as alternative to whitely male comic book heroes and beauty tutorials for different skin colors. I mean, it's empowering and daunting to know that the biggest challenge is finding an audience, especially in our age. Even when you publish with a small press, you're still kind of looking for your audience, really. And this is where we have to help each other, not only from the publisher sides, but POCs, and be the audience of these works. Because if it's not us, then who is it?
True. Anyone else? Okay. The education part, I think, is quite important. From like, I don't know if Kevin wants to jump in on this, because I think the sensitivity that people have to some things is still quite lacking, right? Oh, you've muted yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think like when I think about publishing, Carlo's point, I was gonna say something similar, just about like the types of stories, like they want BIPOC people to tell. I think educating kind of publishers and gatekeepers around that is very important because, especially as like a Black creative, people are very interested in like stories of suffering. I think a good preface is that I'm currently working for Translate in Metro Vancouver on an equity engagement project. So we're going out to marginalized communities and asking them what they would like to see improve with their transit system and with kind of regional growth planning. And so we're very eager to talk to like equity seeking groups within like specific contexts, but we don't really engage them when it comes to other issues like environmental issues or like higher level economic planning or infrastructure planning topics. So it's just the idea of like even the idea of like being an equity seeking person or like being diverse is problematic because I was in Hogan's Alley a week ago and I was speaking to a woman from Toronto, and she was talking about like the centrality of diversity in the sense that like when you are diverse from whiteness, and so it's like centering whiteness at the core, and then everyone else is like kind of revolving around it like planets around the sun. So yeah, I definitely think that like there needs to be more kind of education around working with BIPOC communities and like how to empower them, because that's always the question. People know that like certain institutions or certain fields are white, but they're always quick to say, well, how do we fix it? And when that answer isn't like easily communicated, they kind of just like shrug their shoulders and say, you know, people are just identifying problems, but they don't have solutions. So I think that that's important, like knowing how to work with communities of color, and that education needs to happen.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask Joanne to run through a few more questions. Joanne?
Sure, Julia. Here's one. In what other ways do you interpret or apply in-betweenness, which is defined as other identities, temporalities, etc.? Are there ways in which it intersects and or overlaps with cultural in-betweenness in your writing and or thinking?
So maybe I can just mention language. You know, that's a way in which I keep my home alive when I'm in Canada, because I write in English, but when I'm writing dialogue, I'm thinking a lot of it, saying it aloud in Hindi. And it's strange how language suddenly helps you find truth in your own life and in your own work. Sometimes when I speak in Gujarati, which is my mother tongue, I end up saying something that is humorous, even though the situation might be tragic. It's a weird thing, but language changes my perspective. And I've tried to write a play in Gujarati, and I can never write something serious. I can only write comedies in that language. I don't know what it is, but it can never be poetic and it can never be too serious. It always veers into some dark humor place. In English, somehow other languages seep in, and I love it when that happens. And so for me, being in between is a very rich place. Actually, it's not something that I fear or It's not something that worries me. I'm in no urgent need to settle in or fit in anywhere. I think this is going to be the condition that I'm in. It's a very powerful place to write from. And I think the important thing for me is to find a level of comfort in that discomfort. When you find that, then you can place yourself anywhere and you really are empowered.
Thank you. 5 minutes left, so one more question, I think.
Sure. One more. Whoops. One more.
Yes.
To the emerging authors among the readers, how do you motivate yourself for writing?
I tell my friends about my ideas, and then if they like it, they usually ask me for more. So it puts a little bit of pressure on me to actually start working or keep working at it. So that works a little bit for me. I'm not sure if it'll work, but it works for me.
I have like personal motivations, like when I'm angry, I just like have to write, or when I'm sad, it's just like second nature to me to write. So for me, motivation isn't too hard. I get all these like thoughts just kind of coming to me. It's about making them coherent, which is so hard because I'm just constantly rambling. Yeah, I don't know, but I just work from my emotions a lot. And so a lot of my work can be kind of a bit of a Debbie Downer, but you find beauty in that and you mold it and you shape it. Just work with what is just naturally coming out of you.
I'm kind of a daydreamer on my end, similar to Rachel. Like I do kind of do it out of emotion, but overall I feel like I'm always thinking about what I want to write, like to the point where I'm at work meetings and I'm thinking about like dragons and shit, and I'm just like, wait, I need to pay attention. So like I think it's just this like innate enthusiasm that is like with the emotional stuff, it's catalyzed by that as well, where if I'm feeling frustrated or upset, I'll just sit down and write.
Do you want to say anything, Kevin? Or
Yes, yeah. I think like my motivation to write is just to like share experiences and to kind of contribute to like larger body of work around kind of the Black Canadian experience. Like I think to ping back to the previous question around like in-betweenness, like I exist at like so many intersections. My father was from like a Francophone African country in Central Africa, and my mother's from a British African country in Southern Africa. And then like when I was living in Toronto, in the west end of the city, there are large kind of Somali and Ethiopian populations, and then there's also a large like West Indian Caribbean population. So when I would walk into like the barbershop or into different businesses, people would be like, "Are you West Indian?" Because I look more like them than I do like the East African population, right? So it's always interesting how like I often find myself like different in-betweens. So I think just like my motivation to write is just to kind of tell stories about kind of different experiences I've had and kind of different places I've been to, and kind of reflect on those things, because you know I tell my friends about my experiences and family, but then I guess just like working through certain things that have happened to me and things that like are stuck in my head and I just need to like work through. I guess that's why I've decided to start writing more.
thank you. I want to thank everybody on the panel for sharing your experiences, your writing process, your philosophies, and I know you'll keep writing. I also want to thank the audience for tuning in for LiterASIAN, and I hope you've enjoyed this program. If you want to see more news and upcoming events, please go to www.literasian.com and enjoy the rest of this beautiful sunny day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.